Hey guys, welcome back to my YouTube channel. My name is Maria. If you watch this video and you enjoy it, don't be shy, hit that like button. Subscribe to my channel for any future videos on narcissistic abuse recovery and complex post-traumatic stress disorder. Today I have a video for the scapegoats again, and I just want to talk to you about 3 common wounds that all scapegoats have. And then in the end, I'm going to tell you about what these 3 wounds have in common. So the first wound that all scapegoats have in common is this wound of what I call what's wrong with me, the search of figuring out what is wrong with me. This wound starts in childhood because you are treated differently. You may have had different expectations placed upon you than your siblings did. Whether this means that the expectations for you were lower, so you told yourself the story that you're not able to accomplish things and you're not good enough, or there's a reason. Maybe it's you told yourself you were stupid, or maybe you were told that you were stupid. But the expectations that were placed upon you were much lower than your siblings, or maybe the expectations placed on you were so super high that they were unachievable. You weren't able to achieve those expectations. Again, we could create stories as children to tell ourselves that we're not smart enough because we're not able to meet those expectations that were set too high on purpose. Okay, so something else that in childhood, if you have this wound of what's wrong with me, you may have needed support at some time, maybe in your adolescence, of course in your childhood, and the support that you needed may have been emotional, and you may have been shut down, things may have been swept under the rug, or you may have been met with silence, or in some cases you're met with rage and you're met with anger. Either way, you know that your emotions were not validated. It wasn't okay for you to have the type of emotions or the concerns that you had in your life. So because your emotions and your needs were not supported, instead they were rejected, you come out of that as a child feeling as if there's something wrong with me and with my emotions. Okay, so let's talk about first, that's the part where we figure out what happened in childhood. Now we're going to separate it and talk about how this shows up in your adult life. So when you have that wound of what's wrong with me in childhood, as an adult, you may downplay your accomplishments. So let's say you got a promotion at work, you're doing okay, you have a steady job, and you're living your life, but it's never quite good enough, and you don't really celebrate the promotions that you have. It's kind of just another day. And maybe you've been sober for years and you don't celebrate your sober birthday, but you see other people doing it. But for you, you don't really celebrate your successes or your accomplishments. You downplay your accomplishments. Something else, you may not feel worthy of love. You may not feel worthy of being loved by friends, by family, or, in an intimate way, in a relationship. You just don't feel as if you're worthy because you have this wound of what's wrong with you. And also, maybe you're somebody that has constantly been diagnosed. When we have this wound, we're searching our entire lives to figure out what's wrong with us, and this leaves us vulnerable in the medical world, right? Like, how many people who have complex post-traumatic stress disorder from long-term emotional abuse go to a psychologist or a psychiatrist who diagnoses them with a severe anxiety disorder, a personality disorder, or a mental illness, and then this person is then medicated to suppress their emotions. This also feeds into that wound of what's wrong with me as we become adults. So let's talk about the next wound. So the next wound that every scapegoat has in common is this wound of abandonment. So this wound of abandonment, first, as it shows up in our childhood, is our needs were not met. Your needs were not met. right? So if you had emotional needs, the emotional needs were not met. If you had physical needs, sometimes the physical needs were not met. You might not have had the support that you needed. Also, you may have felt more safety outside of your home than you did inside of your home. So you might have felt more safety when you were alone or at a friend's house or with friends' parents or with an aunt or an uncle or whoever it may have been than you were at your house. Maybe your home was very quiet. Maybe it was the opposite of very quiet. Maybe it was very chaotic. But regardless, you didn't feel the safest at home. You felt safer when you were alone or with other people. And then also, you didn't completely trust your caretakers, but you didn't know why. So you didn't completely trust them, telling them about how you were feeling, your emotions, your relationship, and who you liked in school. You didn't completely trust them with that kind of information because you didn't know how that information was going to be met, or if it was going to be ignored, or what the case was. And your concerns may have been swept under the rug. So something that is going on in your life, you're a teenager and this is big. It feels big to you in your world, and it may have been just shrugged off, or it may have been swept under the rug, or like, oh, that's not really a big deal. Okay, so all of these things are ways in which the wound of abandonment can grow in a child. So let's talk about how they show up in our adult life. So in our adult life, this wound of abandonment can cause us to abandon ourselves. So it can cause some people to become people pleasers. So now other people's needs are more important than our needs. We're going to put other people's needs in front of our own, because as long as we can keep them happy, we don't have to worry about them leaving us. So we call this self-abandoning. We take over the role as the abandoner, and we now abandon ourselves. And we do this by people pleasing or allowing people's needs to come before ours. Also, you may not feel comfortable showing people your authentic self. You may not feel comfortable exposing that because you feel like if they saw who you really were, they might not actually like you. Also, you may self-sabotage. You may sabotage your relationships because if you don't want to get abandoned, if you don't want someone to touch your wound of abandonment, you may abandon them first. And these are some ways in which the wound of self-abandonment shows up in our adult life. So let's talk about the third wound. So the third wound that all scapegoats have in common is this wound of rejection. So you may have had things happen to you, or you may have had needs in your childhood and these needs were rejected or they were pushed back. You had needs and they were met with negativity. Okay, so you associate you needing something to someone getting angry, or someone rolling their eyes or shrugging or acting like your feelings are too big or too much for them to handle. So it's whatever it is, the reaction was something negative. No one invested or believed in your future plans. So maybe when you were a child, you had plans of what you wanted to do with your life when you grew up, but nobody actually invested in these plans, and nobody actually supported or backed you or put any time into talking to you about what you would like to do when you grow up. This can also cause a wound of rejection. You were teased, made fun of, ridiculed, merely for existing. So when you're teased a lot as a child, or you're put down, think of like a little kid who's smaller than someone else, right? Like they're teased and they're put down. A lot of times that causes this wound of rejection, right? And so how does the wound of rejection show up in our adult lives? Well, when you have the wound of rejection, you may take things more personally. So someone's saying something, and it might be because they had a bad day or something that has nothing to do with you, but you may take it personally. You may have a hard time trusting that people actually do love you if you have this wound of rejection. And also, as an adult, you may push people away because you're avoiding having your wound touched. You may reject before being rejected. So these are things in which the wound of rejection shows up in your adult life. Now, let me just give you 3 things that all these wounds have in common. So all of these wounds that a scapegoat shares, this wound of what's wrong with me, the wound of abandonment, and the wound of rejection, all have three things in common. The first thing is that these wounds are made to protect you and your brain and your body from future harm. The second thing is that these wounds worked for you as coping mechanisms as a child, but don't so much work for you as coping mechanisms as an adult. And lastly, these three wounds are things that can be healed. These are things that if you take the time and the energy to separate yourself, to be able to give yourself that space, to take off those false narratives that have been placed on your life and on your identity, and to get down to the core root of who you are, to be able to show up in the world from that person's perspective, and then to have boundaries on yourself and on the rest of the people in your life so that they're in alignment with the person that you now are. This may mean that there are people in your life that are not going to follow along with your healing journey. They're not going to be there anymore because they're not in alignment with the person who's no longer a people pleaser. So that's what these three wounds have in common. If you are someone who's a scapegoat and you are dealing with these wounds, I understand, and it's something that all scapegoats are going to have. So let that validate you throughout your healing journey. Know that this is something that can be healed. Throw a timeline out the window and just keep healing. Okay guys, thank you so much for watching this video. If you enjoyed it, don't be shy, hit that like button, subscribe to my channel for any future videos on narcissistic abuse recovery and complex post-traumatic stress disorder. And as always, you guys, I wish you all the love in the world.